Good evening and welcome to another Hangouts on Air. This is our webinar normally for food safety, but this month we're doing it on fire safety in catering. I'm Steve Pepper, and I have my own training business called Steve Pepper Training Associates, and I'm joined tonight by Patrick Mackey. Good evening, Patrick.
Good evening, Steve. I'll introduce myself. I'm an environmental health practitioner. I work in local government in Scotland, and I happen to be the CIH Assembly Rep for Scotland. And my main line of duty is health and safety. So this is a topic I'm interested in.
Good. Right. Okay. So we'll go straight into the video of the presentation, and I'm going to do a screen share here first, which as long as they haven't changed that as well. We've been having some technical problems tonight, and there are a couple of other people who are going to join us, but unfortunately they weren't able to join the Hangout. Wait a minute. No, let's have a look. Where's the share? No, that's not the right one. There's a screen share. I thought I'd lost it for a minute. That's the right one. Start the screen share, stick that on there, and that should be now live on there.
It is.
Right.
The law on fire safety changed 11 years ago. The fire safety order actually came into force in October 2006. The fire safety order applies to all non-domestic premises in England and Wales, including the common parts of blocks of flats and houses in multiple occupation, or HMOs. It replaced over 70 pieces of separate fire safety legislation. When the law came into place, the fire officers became enforcement officers instead of the ones issuing you with your fire certificates. It took them quite a while to get used to this. Since then, one local hotelier has been heavily fined for not complying with the regs and not having a suitable and sufficient fire risk assessment. Harrogate has also had a couple of nasty fires, including this one at the Majestic Hotel, where one person died as a result. Also, in 2014, Prezzo's Pizza restaurant was burnt out as the result of a fire which had up to 18 appliances in attendance at one stage. It's thought that it was made worse because of the extra fans that hadn't been cleaned out. The law defines two categories of people in relation to fire safety. The first is the responsible person. This is usually the owner or person who is in charge of a particular building. A relevant person is anyone who is lawfully on your premises. This could be the staff, customers, visitors or contractors, but not firefighters. Provide clear and relevant information on risks. Ensure fire prevention measures are in place. Provide information to employees under 16. Consider dangerous substances and the risk to relevant persons. Provide fire safety training on induction within working hours, followed by periodic refresher training. Fire officers can now take action, and this can include informal action, where enforcement officers will often advise on compliance matters. This will be confirmed in writing if requested. Alterations notice issued where there is a risk to relevant persons when a change is going to be made to the premises or to the use of the premises. Enforcement notice. This is issued when there is a failure to comply with the requirements of the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order 2005. There's a minimum of 28 days to rectify the identified non-compliance. And finally, prohibition notice. This is issued when there is an immediate risk of serious injury to relevant persons. All notices may be appealed within 21 days to the court. Prohibition notice remains in force, and alterations and enforcement notices are simply placed on hold. Catering may have a range of traditional fire extinguishers, but it's important to use the correct one. For example, using a CO2 extinguisher on a wood paper-based fire can cause a fire to spread, as well as the operator getting burnt from the dry ice. Fire blankets are traditionally used to put out small, fat fires, but note how to hold the cloth over the hands to prevent burning. Main one for fat fires in kitchens are wet chemical extinguishers and wet chemical installations, but these are over fryers and cooking ranges. These can be set off automatically or manually and are very effective. Sound the alarm either by smashing the glass if there is an automated system, or by shouting fire at the top of your voice to ensure people get out of the building. Telephone for the fire brigade and only fight fire if you've got the right extinguisher, if it's a small fire, and if you've been trained to use it and you're not putting yourself in danger. A lot of people don't realise that fire training is a legal requirement, just like food safety, and needs to be held in work's time. If you're expected to use fire extinguishers, then you should be trained in its use. For a list of online fire safety training, just Google Steve Pepper and click on the link. Undertake a risk assessment. Familiarise yourself with your staff, where the equipment is, and what to do in case of a fire. Have a fire drill on a regular basis to test out people's responses. Ensure your staff are trained and know what to do in case of fire. Any questions?
Well, it's only you there, Patrick, so I can't do that for you. You there, Patrick?
Hi, Steve. Yeah, I'm back online. Just taking the electronic equivalent of 40 winks while I was watching your presentation there.
Yeah.
There's an awful lot of content that's covered in this topic, and I think one of the things that's always useful to remind people about is the fire triangle of fuel, oxygen, and the source of ignition, because a kitchen has all three of those in abundance. It's full of organic materials, it's full of cardboard, it's full of oils and fats in particular, and it's a place where there are plenty of sources of ignition, either flame or very hot surfaces or electrical circuits and so on and so forth. And the whole purpose of a fire safety risk assessment is to avoid those three coming together and putting people at risk.
Yeah, one of the things that really worries me is the chefs that are making creme brulee or very similar sweets with the gas blowtorch. And what they sometimes do is they put the blowtorch on a solid oven top. And of course, that then just blows up in everyone's face and can injure people, but also it could start a fire, by having an extremely large ignition source. Yeah. So that's one of the things that always worries me. Can I just ask, the fire safety order came out in Scotland as well, but there are some differences, and the main one I'm aware of is that in Scotland, the responsible person is actually specified as the owner, whereas in England, it's only specified as the owner's manager or person in charge of a business. So it actually, whoever owns the building in Scotland is the person that's responsible.
I can't remember off the top of my head, Steve, but I think the approach is the whole approach to the fire safety legislation in the UK, and it's exactly the same legislation in Scotland as it is in England. It's just in the Fire Scotland Act, as opposed to the Regulatory Reform Order in England. It is, and it's based almost word for word on the management of health and safety at work regulations. So it's nothing new, it's nothing dramatic. People shouldn't be scared by it. There are some new technical things to pay attention to, but if you're already familiar with your duties and risk assessment process under the management of health and safety at work regulations, this is something you can approach with some confidence that you'll be able to get your head around what your duties are. So certainly my understanding, and I'm happy to be corrected, I haven't got the act in front of me, is that the responsible person is really the equivalent of the occupier or the duty holder in health and safety law. If you have duties under the Health and Safety Work Act, you're going to have duties under fire safety legislation as well, because fire safety is, to all extents and purposes, a health and safety risk that needs to be managed by very similar processes. It's just you have the fire bobbies coming after you rather than the EHO.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be, correct me if I'm wrong, but did it not used to be part of the environmental health officers, or the HP, as they're now called, the health inspector? Did it not come under them originally?
Fire safety is one of those interesting topics that you can tackle under the Health and Safety at Work Act, or as a hazard that is not adequately controlled. But what you do have is you have a separate enforcement authority, and you have a separate regime that is about managing fire safety. However, if I went into premises and found that a fire door was obstructed by packaging or by stored goods, I would deal with that using health and safety powers, because that is about means of egress from the building.
Yeah, well, that's fair enough. I mean, one of the things is that in a simple sort of office environment or whatever, there is help and guidance out there. Now, it's recently changed from, it was based on the community website, and it probably still is.
Yeah,
but it's now moved over, certainly in England, to the Home Office. So I don't know what's happening in Scotland with the legislation, but the responsibility now, I believe, is with the Home Office. But the guidance for either an office or a care home was round about 189 pages. And when I was working for other organisations, I was quite happy to go around, do a tick box type approach to risk assessment, hand it in, and I thought it was great. I then started working with a professionally qualified risk assessor, and I spent 3 or 4 years sharing work with him and doing joint presentations on fire safety. And what I learned over that period of time was that I would now not touch it with a barge pole, particularly if it was a large building or a complex building, because of all the different specifications for the distance travelled, etc., etc.
Yeah.
The signage is also changed. I mean, most people have still got the European signage, which is usually a white person in a green background. But the couple of years ago, they changed the signage. It's now based on the English system, not the European system, and this is Europe-wide. And basically, it should all be in lowercase. Any arrows on them, you can't have an arrow on the final fire exit. The final fire exit should not have an arrow on it. And it's only
unless there's a specific direction of travel when you go through that final
exit. That would be the exception.
You may be going down an external fire escape, in which case you'd have a downward pointing arrow in the direction of travel.
Yeah.
Or but you may have to go up a ramp out of a basement, in which case you'd have an upward pointing arrow either left or right. Yeah.
Yeah. But basically, if it's straight out into the courtyard or something like that, there wouldn't be one. Yeah. The other thing is that it's now a running person that's, I believe, green on a white background, and all the text has got to be sentence case, not capitals. But you wouldn't believe the number of places that still got the old signage. And I was aware of one case at my local pub. They had a refurbishment done last year, and they had on the 2 fire exits, both of which went out into the backyard. They're both the old signage with the white person on a green background, and both had arrows on the final exit. So what the contractor, whoever they were, they'd used new old stock. And I did tell the landlord what they'd been able to do with it, but they'd been paying for work done that's not up to a decent standard. Now, while it's quite possible to do a reasonable quality risk assessment in a low risk environment, provided you read the books, if you are going to take a risk assessment for fire and it's a more complex building, I would always envisage getting hold of an expert. It doesn't cost a fortune, and make sure that you check the person's qualifications, that they are a fit and competent person, because even if they get it wrong, you're probably still liable to some extent for selecting someone who's not up to speed. Is that about right, Patrick?
Yes, of course you are. I mean, on the question of whether it's the right type of fire signage on fire escape signage or not, it's not something I'm necessarily going to beat somebody up, unless it's misleading, unless it's not pointing people in the right direction.
Yeah.
Because when what happens is people will generally attempt to leave a building by the route they came into it if they're not familiar with it, and that's why one of the important things about managing evacuation in the case of fire or the case of a fire alarm is that staff know what to do, know how to advise the customers. So if we're thinking about a restaurant or a pub or somewhere like that, they may not even have an alarm that's audible to everybody, but you may have an alarm that's audible to staff, for instance, so that they can put in place an evacuation procedure that avoids people falling over each other in the rush to get out.
Yeah.
So there are various ways of dealing with these things. But what matters is that systems are robust. People are trained. They understand their roles and responsibilities, and you have some redundancy built in so that you're not dependent upon the one person who happens to have gone to Harrogate for their holidays that weekend.
Yeah. I'm just trying to pull up now an example of the sort of signage, just so people know that's the one.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you can see that well, but where the on the right hand side, so you've got a green person on a white background, sentence case on the left. And if it's not the actual immediate fire exit, or if there needs signage, you've got an arrow pointing right, left, or down, up or down. So that's the sort of thing we're talking about. And yes, I would agree. I wouldn't call it a hanging offence if the firm hasn't got that on, as long as people know to get out. But I would advise them, if I was teaching fire safety on a building, I would certainly advise them that they hadn't got the latest up-to-date signs, and when they're thinking about refurbishing or whatever, then that's something they ought to be considering. I think sorry.
I think it's worth reminding people that the fire safety risk assessment is a 5-step risk assessment that's very similar to the health and safety one. It's about identifying the fire hazards, identifying the people at risk, evaluating, removing or protecting from those risks, recording, planning, informing, instructing and training people, and reviewing the whole process. There's a lot wrapped into that, but there is very good guidance about how to carry out a very good
there's plenty of guidance.
fire safety risk assessment.
Yeah.
And I think
sorry.
What I'd like to do perhaps is look at some of the hazards that commonly occur around catering premises, and you alluded to those in that fire with the pizza premises, where you suggested that perhaps accumulations of grease and ductwork added to the intensity, added the fuel to the fire and to the intensity of the fire.
Yeah.
Because a duct is going to be a chimney, and if you've got a duct full of fuel, natural draft and a fire going away, then that is going to roar. You've effectively got a highly fueled chimney fire there, and that is also going to transmit heat to other parts of the building and potentially lead to breakout of fire in other compartments. So for anyone who's got catering ventilation, having the ductwork cleaned on a regular basis is an essential part of maintenance.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, when I was actually a caterer, it would be probably something like a 3-monthly clean or a 6-monthly clean, depending on how much fish. I mean, if Hugh had been on here tonight, his experience of fish fryers, fish shops being on fire, it's much more intense because they're frying day in, day out, whereas a restaurant might only be frying the odd pan of chips or whatever every now and again. But yeah, it needs to be on a contract. And I think for most caterers, it needs to be a contractor who knows what they're doing to clean the ducting. I don't know many caterers who actually got the wherewithal to actually do the job properly or effectively. So that would be my...
I think for cleaning ducting, like high-level cleaning, is getting into specialist contractor territory. After all, they're experienced, they're equipped, they've got the tools, they've got the access equipment, they've got the right chemicals, they've got the know-how to do it safely. And I think we've all seen what can happen when people start standing on stoves or on prep tables to try and reach light fittings and so on for cleaning. Now, things like cleaning the filters should be part of the routine maintenance that caterers are doing with their ventilation equipment, and making sure that in the grease channels around the inside of canopies, that those are free from grease and kept clean. So that's the user accessible elements of the system.
Yeah, no, I would agree that the filters, you just take them out and you bung them in the sink with a bit of degrease. And the canopies should be part of the cleaning by the catering staff. one of the things that I just want to show people is a bit like pat testing, which I do the odd bit of pat testing just for myself and for a few colleagues on the laptops and whatever. When you're employing people like pat testers, one of the shortcuts they have is they don't do a formal visual inspection. So they just get the plug, bung it on the machine, press the button, and that's a pat test, but it isn't. Now, similarly with pest contractors, in catering, I ask them to label and date the actual bait boxes and the monitoring traps. And again, a lot of pest contractors, particularly on large contracts, don't always do that because it saves them a lot of time if all they do is have a cursory look round and fill the booking. Now, there is a similar problem with people who are checking these sorts of things. And okay, you can do your visual checks and see if that's in the green, depending on what, I mean, this is a powder extinguisher, but it could be any type of extinguisher apart from CO2. I don't think CO2 ones have got these gauges on. But one of the things that they have got to do when they're testing them is they have to weigh them for their contents, whether that's water, CO2, or whatever. And the problem is that a lot of these engineers, a lot of the cowboys, and there are a lot of cowboys out there, simply goes to the machine, say, oh yeah, that's about heavy enough, and then put, and it gets put away. It saves them time. And if someone, I was taught by one of these fire risk assessors, a colleague of mine, and he said, if you see an engineer taking the extinguishers out to the back of the van, then that should be ringing alarm bells for that sort of reason, where they're just, they're taking them out, having a quick cursory check, putting them back, and not doing a full formal check on them. So the weight of the extinguisher is something that your fire engineer should be checking. If they're not, then ask questions on how competent they are. So I don't know if you'd come across that on the fire extinguisher checks with any people you've met.
No, I haven't. I mean, the engineers I've seen and who work locally to me are professionals, and they do a good job. I mean, in our office, we have the extinguishers are serviced at about an annual interval, and they will be stripped down and recharged and so on and so forth as necessary. Another topic that I'm quite keen on in catering, and it's a fire and explosion risk, is gas safety. I don't know if that was something you wanted to talk about tonight.
Yeah, there is. There's a document out there called, we did a session on it last year, called Safer Workplace, Better Business. And it's got a section at the end of it on mobile gas safety and installations on gas safety and market trading, the sort of hot dog burger vans, which aren't catering market stands, they're actually trailers. Yeah. And there is a whole checklist on gas safety for those out there, which if anyone wants a copy of that, it's done by the I can't remember what it's, a safety group down in Devon or whatever, and they're quite happy for me to pass this on, provided I give them a mention to whoever gets a copy of it. And if you just go to my website, it's on the screen now, or if you just Google my name, you'll get my website. My email's on there. Just send me an email, and I'll send you one of these packages out. But it's really good. I mean, what's your thoughts on gas safety then, Patrick?
Well, it's absolutely critical because it's a fire and explosion risk. And I have recently seen a business, a pub put out of business as a result of a gas fire in the kitchen. The damage was just too much for the business to sustain. I won't say any more about that because it's still a matter under investigation. But the important thing here is if you have gas, whether it's LPG or mains gas in your premises, you have a duty under the gas safety installation and use regulations to maintain that in a safe working condition. And that means that at least once a year, you need to have a competent gas safe registered engineer into your premises to carry out a thorough inspection of the installation.
One of
that
them,
engineer is only competent if they are, if their ticket shows that they are registered for commercial catering equipment and of the right gas type. So you can't have an LPG engineer working on natural gas and vice versa.
yeah, unless they're qualified on both, which is rare.
Yes.
Yes, we've had this issue before where we've seen gas certificates at the annual Christmas market, and they've been done by a domestic engineer or whatever. So we had to say, I'm sorry, you need that, get that checked out with a competent engineer. Because most people in the catering trade don't understand about gas safe and the registrations. I mean, when we had our central heating redone 2 or 3 years ago, we had different lads in for different jobs, and they all had different cards, and they should be carrying the cards on them. You can actually check those cards online against the number, and that should tell you whether or not they're safe or not.
Yes.
But and we actually had a guy in Harrogate who got sent to jail because going back about 8 years or whatever, he got 12 months in the army because he was calling himself, when it was Corgi registered at the time, he was calling people and saying he was Corgi registered, and he wasn't. And he got caught out twice, one of which was potentially very dangerous on the flue and the ventilation and whatever.
There's certainly a fair degree of lack of awareness, I will say, about the need to have gas work done by a competent person. You can't just extend your own gas lines and put another appliance in somewhere where you need it. It has to be done by a competent engineer. Something that I saw that really did scare me a few years ago, I was in a catering premises on an island, and the stove was very, very old. It was an enameled cast iron catering appliance, which must have been just post-war 50s or something like that. And where one of the knobs should have been was this great lump of fire clay. So I said to the chef, why is there fire clay here? And he said that was because it was leaking gas.
Yeah, good one.
Right.
We had the very hot on gas safety, particularly at things like the Yorkshire Showground, and the one I'm involved with is the Harrogate Christmas Market in Ireland. So I have to go around and check all these catering stalls out or anywhere there's gas. And the reason they're very hot on it now is about 3 years ago we had a burger van which went up in smoke. It exploded. And it was sort of like, you know, they don't want to be embarrassed by having it happen again. So everyone that's got anything to do with mobile catering, gas, etc., you know, they've got advice, they've got leaflets, they've got everything. Just before we finish, I just want to mention something about a couple of things that you might want to consider in your fire safety. Now, you might want to identify a fire warden as part of your team if it's big enough and you consider it's warranted. Now, if you do need to train them as a fire warden. And if you're going to ask people to use fire extinguishers, then anyone that's expected to use them, again, they must be formally trained in their use. You can't just expect people to do it. And there is a bit of a conflict because owners and insurance companies don't want to have to pay out all those business. Fire brigade want you to save your life. So basically, you know, you don't sort of try messing around with a fire extinguisher unless you're competent and confident to use it. The other thing about fire wardens, and it's always a good idea to issue them with this sort of thing, so that when the fire brigade eventually arrives, after you call them out, that you've got some form of recognition. Now, in some places like nursing homes, they train them all. There's one nursing home I work at, they train all the staff to be fire wardens. And it's the first one who gets to the codes that's a nominated fire warden, and then all the rest just help that person. The other thing, that if you're raising the alarm and it's either noisy or you haven't got an electronic system, one piece of kit for a fire warden is one of these. And if you just put your fingers over your ears, that's very loud. It's the old Thunderer type of thing. And I would always have that hung up next to the cloth so that you can raise the alarm. The other way of raising the alarm is if you are in a real life and death situation and you're having to advise people to go out, the one thing you don't do is stop and say, oh, would you mind leaving? And they will then say why, and then you get into a conversation and say, well, there's a fire. Well, I can't see any smoke. And, you know, if you just run down the corridor shouting fire at the top of your voice, no one ever argues. But if you try and have a conversation, that's going to delay people getting out. Now, a simple flashover in a small room that's got soft furnishings, and typically from a small waste paper bin type fire, that room will be well alight and have a flashover in about 3 minutes. If you look on YouTube, there's plenty of videos out there that will show you that. One final piece of equipment that I would always issue a fire warden with as well is one of these, and I don't know, a decent flashlight, so that, you know, people can actually see what's happening. One of the things with a fire, you will always get smoke spread. It's very disorientating, and obviously you need to get on the floor where the oxygen is rather than standing up, but it's very disorientating. At least if you've got a torch, you're increasing the chances of being able to see your way out when smoke starts building up. Now, I think that's about all I've got to cover on this without spending 6 hours doing a fire safety course for fire wardens. Is there anything else that you'd like to cover, Patrick?
I think the only thing I would say is, if you haven't done a fire safety risk assessment, do some research and do one. You will make a difference, and you may well save a life, and it could be yours.
Yes, I would agree with that. Anyway, we'd better stop. We've just about done our half hour now, maybe just gone over a little bit. I didn't think we'd actually cover as much ground, but I think we've this has been well. Haven't yet decided what we're doing for next month, so if you want to hang on when we've come off air, Patrick, then maybe have a quick discussion on that. So it's good night from me.
And it's good night from him.
Okay, cheers.